Hi everyone, this is Eric Bond, the founder of Beat the GMAT, and I'm very excited to welcome you to today's webinar, which is called Demystifying the GMAT Exam, a closer look at integrated reasoning and quant. This is a two-part webinar series that we are co-hosting with our friends at the GMAC, the makers of the GMAT test. So for today's webinar, we're going to take a closer look at the IR and quant sections, and this will include some study tips, some analyses of example GMAT questions, and some insights into how the GMAT scores are also going to be used in the admissions process as well. For today's webinar structure, in a moment I'm going to hand over the reins to my colleague Trevor Riesk. Trevor is going to go through his presentation, and at the end we're going to try to reserve about 15 minutes to answer your questions live in a live Q&A. Trevor will stick around for the remaining time and answer your questions that you submit. And to submit a question, all you have to do is at any time during this webinar, enter your question right on the right-hand side of your screen. In the GoToWebinar panel, there's a chat box area. We can actually see questions being submitted there, and our team is going to moderate the questions, and I will serve them up to Trevor, as many as possible for the time that we have at the end of this presentation. Just one note too, a request actually. Please no profile evaluation questions. This is not the right event to ask those types of questions. So before I hand it over to Trevor, I want to say a couple words about his background. Trevor is currently the Field Marketing Coordinator at the Graduate Management Admission Council, GMAC, the makers of the GMAT test, based in Reston, Virginia in the United States. Currently, he works with educational partners like the Beat the GMAT community to increase awareness about the GMAT exam and graduate management education. And Trevor is also responsible for overseeing student outreach and diversity initiatives and activities. He is a graduate of Virginia Tech, where he studied marketing management. So Trevor, thank you so much for joining us today in doing this part one of this two-part webinar series for the Beat the GMAT community.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me.
All right.
So thank you for that great introduction. So as Eric mentioned, I'm going to go over, this is part one of the webinar series. So today we'll talk about the IR section. So don't know how many people in the audience have maybe taken the GMAT before. If you've taken it before June of 2012, this is a new section to the exam. So kind of go over that a little bit. And we'll talk about the quantitative portion of the exam as well. Let me see if I can advance my slides here. For some reason, not working. There we go. All right. So we're going to cover a few things today. I apologize for the technical difficulty there. So we'll go over just exactly what the GMAT exam is covering. For those of you that might be a little bit unfamiliar with the exam, we'll talk about just what exactly is covered on the exam. We'll jump into the integrated reasoning section, which I mentioned is kind of a newer section, launching in June of 2012. So about a year, a little more than a year old at this point. And I'll have some examples from that section. A little bit different than the other, the verbal and the quantitative sections of the exam. We'll talk about the quantitative as well. I'll go into some examples there. There are two question types that you're going to want to be aware of, so I'll go over that. And then after that, we'll kind of talk a little bit about actually preparing for the exam. So as Eric mentioned at the beginning, if you have questions, feel free to ask them. We will have time for questions at the end, so if something pops in your head, feel free to type it into the question area. So this is the structure of the GMAT exam. It's made up of 4 sections. The 2 in the box there are the ones that we're talking about today. But just quickly, you start out with an analytical writing assessment. Think of this like the essay portion of the exam. We'll get into that a little bit more during next week's webinar, but I just want you to know that's how the exam starts off. 30 minutes there for your essay. Then you jump into this integrated reasoning section. So if you have taken the exam in the past, you might have noticed that there used to be 2 essays, 30 minutes each. We dropped one of those essays and replaced it with the integrated reasoning section. So 30 minutes for that section. Again, the timing doesn't change, just the question types. After you finish the integrated reasoning section, you'll have the opportunity to take a short break. The break is 8 minutes long. It's not a ton of time. So what I would recommend is that when you're preparing for the exam, if you are taking a practice exam or you're trying to simulate exam conditions as best you can, and you do want to take that break, make sure you time yourself. It's important to remember to come back from that break on time because the exam or time will be deducted from your next section of the exam if you're not back on time. So something to keep in mind there. So when you come back for your break, you jump into the quantitative reasoning portion of the exam. There's 37 multiple choice questions there, lasting 75 minutes. After that, you're given the option of another break. And then you come back and you finish up with the verbal, 41 questions there, and 75 minutes again. So all in all, the total exam time is 3.5 hours, maybe up to 4 hours if you choose to take all the breaks. So that's kind of how it's set up. Trying to get my slides to go here. There we go. So as you can imagine, the GMAT exam itself is only one part of the overall admissions process. And depending on how much research you've done, you've probably realized that there are other things that are going to be important on your application. Things like your work experience, things like your undergraduate GPA, your volunteer work, some things like that, right? And the GMAT is certainly a part of the overall process. So where does it fit in with the rest of it? So if you imagine this slide here is kind of a balance, right? So on the left we have the GMAT, and on the right we have other things that are important during the admissions process that aren't necessarily tested on the GMAT exam, but are just as important. So let's start with the GMAT on the left. So obviously the exam is going to provide some value to admissions folks. It'll help assess your academic potential. It's going to compare you to other applicants. I think that's pretty straightforward. You would expect that from taking the exam. The other thing about the GMAT is it's kind of valuable to you as an applicant. You know, a lot of people think, oh no, I have to take this test just because I have to take it. While you certainly probably do have to take it for a lot of the programs you're thinking about, there's value in actually preparing for and taking the GMAT exam. It gives you the opportunity to kind of stand out in the crowd. A higher GMAT score can kind of differentiate you from other applicants that are applying for similar programs. Maybe other parts of your application aren't as good as your awesome GMAT score that you just got, right? So it can kind of help balance out maybe if you have a lower undergraduate GPA, for example. A higher GMAT score can kind of help level out some of those things. There's some intangible things as well. Something like confidence. I know if I had a really high GMAT score heading into my graduate program, I'd feel pretty comfortable and pretty confident that I'm going to do well in this program. Doing well in the GMAT can certainly help you feel that way. The other thing is, I would say, is that the GMAT, in preparing for the exam and taking the exam, you're actually not just preparing for an exam, you're preparing for school. The skills that we test on the GMAT exam are skills that we found that schools want to see their students have. And generally, the rule is if we try to make the exam so that if you do well in the exam, you're going to do well in the graduate program that you're entering in. We don't just make up questions because we think they're fun and challenging. We like to have them test certain skills that schools are looking for. So whether you realize it or not, in kind of studying and preparing for the GMAT, you're getting ready for school. So if you imagine on the other side, the right block here on our scale, on our level, these are other things that are important in admissions, but not necessarily tested on the GMAT exam. So things like your leadership skills, your ability to work in teams, any job-specific related skills that you may have. Business-specific, subject-specific knowledge, not tested on the GMAT exam, but they might be important at other instances during the overall admissions process. The last one there, spoken English. You know, depending on the program you enter in, you know, they might require a grasp of spoken English. The thing I would say about the GMAT is that there are no speaking portions, obviously, but the test is only offered in English, no matter where you take it throughout the world. So it's just something to keep in mind. But hopefully you can see with this slide why or where the GMAT fits in the balanced admissions process. All right. So I mentioned that the integrated reasoning section is relatively new, launching in June of 2012. So I want to go through kind of why we started the integrated reasoning section last year, where it came from. I'm going to start going through some examples of questions as well. Maybe not so much for the integrated reasoning, but for the quantitative portion. You might want a piece of paper and pencil, because I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of math. I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of work. And then we'll kind of talk about how you arrive at some of the answers. But basically the idea behind integrated reasoning is that today's business world is kind of rich in data. To succeed, you're going to need to analyze information from a variety of sources, develop strategies, and make decisions based on that information. So that's kind of where that assimilate and interpret comes from. You want to bring data together from different sources. You want to interpret that data and eventually convert it into something useful. The integrated reasoning section of the exam measures your ability to problem solve in that area. If you'd like to learn a lot more, if for whatever reason your question doesn't get answered today or you have questions that you think about later, MBA.com is a great resource to learn everything there is to know about integrated reasoning beyond what I could talk about in an hour time frame today. So like I said, there's tons of information, even more examples than we're talking about now on our website, MBA.com. So like I said, new question types are designed to evaluate a candidate's capabilities to assimilate information from different materials, integrate information from different sources to solve complex problems, recognize and evaluate different trade-offs, accurately interpret data from a data table, and you'll see that kind of explicitly in a second as one of the question types. Can you interpret visual data representations, things like histograms, line graphs, bar and pie charts, scatter plots, to determine or estimate probabilities and statistics? I'll show you that in a second. Can you identify which certain types of graphs represent data in a table? Can you identify and interpret positive or negative relationships from a table of data? Things like that. So you'll see in the examples here in a second kind of where all those skills come into play. So the new section of integrated reasoning is a little bit different. So obviously your essay, that's pretty straightforward. You're gonna write an essay. The quantitative and the verbal sections are multiple choice. There's an A, B, C, D, E answer. Integrated reasoning is a little bit different. There are some different response options. The integrated reasoning section consists of 4 question types. As I mentioned, they require to analyze and synthesize data in different formats and from multiple sources. So that's kind of the theme of the integrated reasoning section. Can you pull data from different areas, bring it together, synthesize it, and kind of formulate a plan of action? Questions are designed to measure how well you integrate data and solve complex problems, as I kind of mentioned. So along those lines, you must answer all the parts of a single question in order to receive credit. So it's either every part of the question is right or it's wrong type deal. So as I mentioned, there are different kind of response options aside from the A, B, C, D, E stuff. Pull down menus. There are a couple multiple choice type things, not quite A, B, C, D, E, but similar. There are tables that you can kind of manipulate. There's a true false type question. So, and I'm going to show you examples of each in a second, but just know it's a little bit different than the rest of the exam. What's different about this section is that you can actually use a calculator. So for the quantitative portion, you're not allowed to use a calculator. In the integrated reasoning section, there's a calculator built into the section that you can pull up on your screen when you're testing. I don't know how many of you heard about the computer adaptive model of testing. So that's how we run the multiple choice portion of the exam. This section is not computer adaptive. If you don't know a lot about the computer adaptive model, I'd love to explain it today, but we only have an hour. So look it up on MBA.com. It's pretty self-explanatory. Basically, the computer adapts to how you're taking the exam. And as I mentioned, that last bullet point, that because of the way the questions are structured, we can't offer partial credit. So as you can see on the left there are 4 different question types. And I'm going to kind of go through them here. So this is an example of a multi-source reasoning question. It's multi-source because if you see at the top here, there are, where it says email 1, email 2, email 3, those are tabs that you can move back and forth between. So again, if you think back to a couple slides ago, we're trying to get data from different sources and bring that data together. So what I want to do is, this is an example that I wanted you guys to work out. So there are actually 3 tabs. It's kind of tough to do on PowerPoint, but if you want to read the first 2 there, email 1 and email 2, I'll give you, maybe a minute and a half to do that, and then I'll flip to the next slide where you can see email 3, and then we'll try to answer the question. So if you want to take a minute to do that, feel free. All right, hopefully you got a chance to read those. I'm going to move to the next slide, which contains email 3, and then we'll talk about the answer. All right, so if you see over on the right there, you can either answer yes, no to these 3 questions. So essentially, it's a true-false type deal. So I don't know if you guys had a chance to think about it, but if we go with the first question there, the administrator is unwilling to invite as many participants in the second group as were invited in the first group. What do you guys think the answer is there? So the answer is actually no for that one. The next question, the project coordinator does not expect to be able to meet the goal for numbers of completed surveys received. Again, the answer is no there. The last question, the administrator is willing to accept some risk of exceeding the budget for compensating participants. This one, the answer is yes. So that's kind of how those questions work. You answer the yes or no on the right side there. While you'll have the ability to flip back and forth between the different tabs. Obviously, it's just a little bit more difficult with the with PowerPoint here to do that. So that's how that will work. The other question type in the integrated reasoning section is table analysis. This might be familiar to you all if you think about like an Excel spreadsheet. So on the left here, we have a table. This one is different commodities, right? You'll have the ability to perform calculations and sort the table. So if you want to take a look at that one, and we'll talk about the answers in a second. I realize it's kind of tough without being able to sort and perform calculations right now, but you know, the GMAT prep software and things like that would be able to help you, more than I can do in a PowerPoint here. So hopefully you can just look at the table. I realize it's tough, so we'll go through the answers. No individual country produces more than 1/4 of the world's sugar. So the answer there is yes. It's tough to do without performing calculations, so just kind of take my word for it on this one. But again, these question types, you're going to answer yes or no. So basically true, false. If Brazil produces less than 20% of the world's supply of any commodity listed in the table, Brazil is not the world's top exporter of that commodity. The answer to that question is no. Of the commodities in the table for which Brazil ranks first in world exports, Brazil produces more than 20% of the world's supply. Again, the answer to that question is no. And hopefully you guys will get to play around with some more integrated reasoning questions when you can actually sort the table. If you see up at the top left there, that's how you access the calculator. So if you want to perform some calculations and that kind of stuff. This is a screenshot from our GMAT prep software, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. It's pretty much exactly the same as to what the actual testing environment will look like, by the way, minus the little show answer button down there. Obviously, that's not on the exam itself. So moving on, here we have a graphics interpretation question. So as the name implies, there's going to be a graphic up at the top there. This one is a Venn diagram. As I mentioned at the beginning of the section, there's some different charts and pie graphs and scatter plots and that kind of stuff that you may see. What's different about answering these questions is that you will select from the drop-down menus there to make each sentence correct. So I realize it's kind of tough to do again on the PowerPoint, but if you think about, here are the answer options that you would see. For each sentence, the answer could either be 1 of 6, 1 of 3, 2 of 3, or 5 of 6. So that is the answer choices for each sentence there. Let me give you a minute to think about what the answer might be there. So the answer for the first question, if one student is selected at random from the 300 surveyed, the chance that that student will be under 30 or a high school graduate or both is, and the answer is 5 of 6. Obviously, it's kind of tough without seeing all the answers there, but basically what we're looking for is, can you take what information is in that chart there, and this is a statistics type question that you would answer. The second one there, if one student is selected at random from the 300 surveyed, the chance that the student will be both under 30 and a high school graduate is, and the answer is 1 of 3. So that's kind of how you do those. It's a little bit different in selecting the answer from a drop-down. As I mentioned, there is no partial credit given, so you have to have both those answers correct in order to get the whole question right. So two-part analysis, this is where this is a little different. So basically what you're going to do here is you're going to read the information at the top, and you're going to select one answer from each column. So if you read the information at the top, in column 1 you're going to select S over E as the answer, and column 2, 60 over E as the answer there. So another kind of different answer type is required there. Just remember that you can only pick one in each column to make the answer correct. Again, it's an all or nothing type thing. You have to have both right in order to get the question correct. So as I mentioned, this is a new section of the exam. It's only about a year old at this point, a little more than a year. And as I also mentioned, the idea behind the GMAT exam is to test skills that are going to be relevant in a graduate program, right? So based on feedback that we have there, the skills that are being tested on integrated reasoning are 50% and 28% there, either very relevant or relevant to coursework in a graduate management education program. Along those lines, we kind of got feedback from those in the corporate world as well. And as you can see, similar results with the 25% and 60% in terms of these are skills that they want their employees to have. So as I mentioned, we're not just sitting in our office here in Reston coming up with questions because we think they're fun. We want these skills to be very relevant to what you're actually going to be doing in a graduate program, what you're actually going to be doing in the corporate world. And hopefully you can see with some of these examples, I don't know about you, I work with Excel spreadsheets a lot, and that's kind of a thing that you have to perform calculations, you have to bring data together, all that kind of stuff. So hopefully you can kind of see where those skills come into play. So we're going to jump into the quant section now. There are two question types, as I mentioned, in the quantitative section. One is problem solving, and the other is data sufficiency. So the quantitative section of the GMAT measures the ability to reason quantitatively, solve quantitative problems, and interpret graphic data. Problem solving and data sufficiency questions are intermingled throughout the section. Both types of the questions require knowledge of arithmetic, elementary algebra, and some commonly known concepts of geometry. So no really higher level math is needed, so we're not going to ask you to perform some calculus stuff that nobody remembers anyway. So that's kind of how it's set up. The problem solving questions we'll go into in a little bit, as well as the data sufficiency section. For me, the data sufficiency section is a little bit different than what you may be used to in terms of answering math questions, but we'll talk about it in a second. As I mentioned, kind of a theme throughout this presentation is that we want to test skills that are valuable in a business school, in the graduate program. So with these questions, obviously, as I just mentioned, we're looking, can you analyze data? Can you differentiate what's important in terms of the data that you do have? So these are skills that business schools are looking for and that you're going to be asked to do once you enroll in a program. So as I mentioned, there's two question types, the first being problem solving, and they're kind of mixed up throughout the whole section. There's 37 questions. Problem solving will be some of them, right? So these are pretty traditional type problems that you may be used to. Basically, you solve the problem. No calculator, as I mentioned. So let's do this one together. It's a pretty straightforward problem-solving question. So the price of lunch for 15 people was $207, including a 15% gratuity for service. What was the average price per person, excluding, so it's a keyword there, the gratuity? So I'll give you a couple minutes to answer that. If you guys got out a piece of scratch paper, and Eric, maybe you can see some of the answers that come in to see what people thought.
Yeah, absolutely. If you guys would like to submit your answer, go ahead and just put it in that chat window, and I'll take a look and report the results to Trevor. I see a first response coming in from Victor, 11.73. Any other takers here? Oh, okay. Yeah, they're starting to come in. So 15.87, 11.73, 12, 12. I feel like I should have some Jeopardy music for next time.
That would be good, yeah. We should
Add a
work
little
on
drama.
that.
Yeah. 11.73, 11.5.
So it sounds like we have a pretty good amount of answers coming in. I'll tell you off the bat, so here are the answer choices. Sorry, I should have showed those off the beginning, but maybe if you come up with the answer on your own without guessing, that's maybe a better thing for you. I don't know. So the answer is B here, 12. So if you look at the problem, the $207, that includes a 15% gratuity for service. So we're trying to find out what the price is per person minus that gratuity. So what you want to do here is you can express this as an equation. So $207 equals 1.15x, right? Because we're adding in that 15% gratuity. So after that, it becomes pretty simple. You just divide each side by 1.15. X becomes $180. Everybody with me? I wish I could do this on a blackboard or something like that, but hopefully you're sticking with me here. And then you divide that $180 by 15 people, and you get $12 per person. So hopefully that makes sense to everyone. As I mentioned, it's not overly complicated math, but what we're trying to do is get to the point where you can break down a question like that, just see exactly what they're asking. So let's try to do, I think I have one more here. So why don't we take a minute and a half, 2 minutes to kind of read through this one and see what the answer may be, now that I actually gave you the A, B, C, D, E responses.
Same deal, guys. If you want to submit your responses via chat, just go ahead and do that, and I'll read off those responses to Trevor. All right, we see some answers coming in here. I see C, some B's, B, lobbies. Lots and lots of bees.
Well, that's good. Sounds like we have a smart group. The answer is B. For those of you that might still be working or maybe got a different answer, the way you want to do this one is you want to determine the food costs per person per day. So on a 3-day fishing trip, 4 adults consume food costing $60. For the same food cost per person per day, what would be the cost of food consumed by 7 adults during a 5-day trip? So, like I said, you want to find the food cost first per person per day. So what you do is you divide the total food cost, which is $60, by 4 adults and by 3 days. So 60 divided by 4, and then divided by 3, that equals 15. And then you want to divide by days, 3, so you get $5 per person per day. Then you want to find out how much is it going to cost 7 adults on a 5-day trip. So you multiply that 5 by 7 and then by 5, and you get $175. So like I said, it's tough to explain over the phone. I would love to do it on a blackboard or something like that, but hopefully you guys can stick with me there. And it sounds like most of you got the right answer anyway, so I'm dealing with a smart group of people here. So those are the way the problem-solving questions are set up. Traditional type math problems basically is a good way to think about it. These are things that you've probably done, whether it be in your undergraduate work, maybe even younger in school. These are things that they're pretty straightforward. Where it gets a little bit different is the other question type in the quantity section. So these problems are called data sufficiency. Basically how they're structured is you're going to be given a statement and then 2 facts. We're asking basically here, do you have enough information in order to solve the problem? So you'll see in a second, a lot of us have, if you think about the problem-solving question, you see a problem and you want to get the answer. Data sufficiency is a little bit different in that we're asking, do you have enough information in order to solve this problem? And I'll show you with an example what that means in a second. And this kind of relates back to the business world in the sense that a lot of times you're not going to have all the necessary information you need in order to solve a problem. But can you use the information that you do have in order to make a educated decision, basically? I'll show you what it looks like in a second. First off, the A, B, C, D, E answers here for data sufficiency questions, they remain the same. So you're given a statement, you're given 2 facts to back it up, and then A, B, C, D, E are always these choices. So a good tip when you're taking the exam is to memorize these. They're not going to change. You're going to be wasting time on the exam if you're reading through each one of these again because they're always the same. So how it works, I'll come back to the example in 1 second. So basically how you answer these questions is statement 1 alone is sufficient to solve the problem above. B is statement 2 alone is sufficient, but statement 1 is not. C is maybe you need both these statements together, but both of them by themselves don't help you solve the problem. D is each statement on their own will help you solve the problem, and E, statements 1 and 2 together are not sufficient to help you solve the problem. So how does that work in the data sufficiency section? So like I mentioned at the top there, is the average of X and Y greater than 20? So that's your statement. And then you're given 2 facts below. So the number 1 being the average of 2X and 2Y is 48. And the other statement is X equals 3Y. So I will give you maybe a minute and a half, and we'll kind of talk through this if you want to try to do it on your own first. Remember back to the previous slide, those are your answer choices.
Okay, some answers starting to trickle in here. I'm seeing some A's. Any other takers for this question? Another A, I see. More A's.
Good stuff. So this group continues to be on top of things. So A is the correct answer here. What you want to do with a lot of these data sufficiency questions is really figure out what the question is asking, right? So here, the average of x and y can be represented as the sum divided by 2. That's the formula for getting an average of something, right? So you can rewrite the top as x plus y divided by 2 is greater than 20. And this is going to help you with the rest of the problem. So if you simplify that out, you get x plus y is greater than 40. Everybody with me so far? So statement 1, is this going to be sufficient to help you solve the problem? So we're going to express this statement as another equation. So 2x plus 2y divided by 2 equals 48. That's just rewriting it as an equation. What you want to do is then simplify that out. So basically x plus y equals 48. So therefore, 48 is bigger than 40, right? Which is the above re-expressed equation, right? Our original statement, x plus y divided by 2, or I'm sorry, x plus y is greater than 40. So 48 is bigger than 40. Therefore, we can use statement 1 to solve the problem above. It's a sufficient statement, right? And most of you selected A, so that's right. I'll show you why 2 does not work here. So what I would like to do is take 2, x equals 3y, and sub it back into our original statement there. So if we have x plus y is greater than 40, let's sub in that 3y. So 3y plus y is greater than 40. Simplifies to 4y is greater than 40. We simplify that out, so we get y is greater than 10. So we know that x is 3 times a number greater than 10. But we don't know what that number is. Right? There's nothing there that will tell us that. So if y is greater than 10, then the answer to the question above is the average of x and y greater than 20. That answer would be yes, but y could be less than 10, right? We just don't know. So without additional information, this question can't be answered. So it's not sufficient. There's another way you can do this too. You can substitute values for x and y that satisfy the condition x equals 3y. So let's say you do y equals 5 and x equals 15. So x plus y divided by 2 equals 10. That's not greater than 20. But if you do, let's say y equals 20 and x equals 60, you get x plus y divided by 2 equals 40, which is greater than 20. So really there's no way to kind of tell what the answer would be based on statement 2. So it's not sufficient. Statement 1 alone is the answer there, so the answer is A. Hopefully that made sense kind of going through on the phone. I have one more example that I'll go through quickly because I know we have about 15, 20 minutes and I want to make sure we get to questions. This one, can the positive integer p be expressed as the product of 2 integers, each of which is greater than 1? So what this question really is asking in a different way, is p a prime number? Does that make sense? Because the 2 integers have to be greater than 1. A prime number can only be divided by 1 in itself, right? So those are the only integers that would work. So we're not looking to determine the value of p, but really just trying to find out, is p a prime number? So if it is, the answer to the question above would be no. If it's not a prime number, the answer to the question above would be yes. So for statement 1, the possible values of p are 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, all between 31 and 37. None of those numbers are prime. We can solve the question above, so that statement is sufficient. P is odd is statement 2, right? So there are several possible values of p that are prime and others that are not prime. So we just don't have enough information there to solve the problem. So again, the answer to this question is A. Statement 1 by itself is sufficient. Statement 2 is not. So hopefully that made sense to everyone. This is a section of the exam that personally, when I took the GMAT, I spent the most amount of time preparing for, just because the question types are a little bit different. And I think it's one thing to know the underlying math skills, but as you can see from this problem here, sometimes you just gotta, it takes a little while to kind of figure out what exactly it is they're asking. Here, it's just a simple, is p a prime number? But it's asking a little bit of a different way. So we're kind of getting you to think a little bit, as opposed to just asking, hey, is p a prime number, yes or no? That's how these questions are structured. like I said, you can know the math upside down and backwards, but really get used to how the questions are asked and start developing your own kind of strategies on how to answer them. So that kind of segues into how to prepare for the GMAT. So there are tons of ways out there to do that. And I always have to give the worst answer possible when it comes to how do I prepare for the GMAT, and that's it depends on each individual person. I wish I could give you an exact formula of the best ways to do it and assure you of getting 700, 750, but it just doesn't work like that. It depends on a lot of different things that each individual person has to deal with. You know, your time that you have, your environment in which you're going to be studying, your ability to open up a guidebook and just do practice problems, that kind of stuff. That being said, there are tons of resources out there to help you prepare and get ready for the GMAT. I'm going to go through some of the ones that we produce at GMAC. That's the company that produces the exam. There are certainly tons of other products out there. There are certainly other ways to prepare for the GMAT, but this is kind of what we offer on our end. So I'm just going to kind of go through each one here. Up in the top left there, that's GMAT Write. Obviously, as the name implies, that's going to help you with the writing portion of the exam. You can actually write essays and have them scored by actual people. So kind of a useful tool if you're worried about the essay portion of the exam. The three books on the left there with GMAT up the side, the turquoise one, the green one, and the blue one there, those are the official review guides that we produce. The turquoise one, that's going to contain all the sections of the exam. If you want a little bit more help with the quant or the verbal, we offer supplement books for that with more practice problems. What's really great about these guides is that they are using official retired GMAT questions. So these are questions that have been used on the GMAT in the past. They're the only books out there that offer that. If you actually see a GMAT question that's being used right now, chances are you're sitting and taking the actual exam. So watch out for, you might be doing some research online, you might see a group that offers official GMAT questions that are being used right now. Either two things are happening there. One is that they're lying and just trying to sell you something. Or two, that's kind of an issue that we would like to know about on our end because we like to keep our questions secret so that the test remains fair and accurate. And we really don't like cheating like that. So, like I said, these are the best resources that you have in terms of seeing what actual GMAT questions have looked like in the past. GMAT paper tests are available to you. So way back when, before we offered the exam on a computer, we had paper tests. We still have those tests. You can download them and practice that way if you want to. Just remember that you can only take the exam on a computer at a testing center. The GMAT handbook is a good resource for when you're getting ready to take the exam. It goes over a lot of the logistical pieces of taking the exam. So things like what time you should show up to the testing center, what types of ID you should bring, all that good stuff. It's a good idea to at least flip through that thing at least once. The last thing you want is to show up to the testing center after you study for 3-4 months and be turned away because you don't have the right ID. Try to avoid that. Read through the GMAT handbook. It's a good idea before you get started. GMAT Focus, up in the corner there, is a diagnostic tool that's going to help you with the quantitative section of the exam. So basically how it works is you answer some quantitative questions. They will spit out a report telling you this is where you should focus your time, or these are the areas that you're weak in when it comes to the quantitative section. Actually, a really cool resource to kind of assess your strengths and weaknesses in the quantitative section. The best thing you can do, which I recommend to everyone listening today, is you can go to MBA.com and you can download the GMAT Prep software. What's great about GMAT Prep is that it's a free download. It includes 2 free practice exams, which use the same exact scoring algorithm as the exam itself. So if you want to get a good idea of what you may score on the exam, this is the best way to do it. And I'm going to show you a little bit more about GMAT Prep in a second. And as I mentioned, it's a free download. So GMAT Focus, as I mentioned, is a diagnostic test for the quantitative section. It's computer adaptive. You get real questions from the GMAT in the past, You get instant scores that are going to rank your strengths and show you maybe some of your weaknesses. Covers all question types. The cost there is $29.99. It's an online type deal where you can access it on your computer. Really good idea if you're worried about the quantitative section. It's going to tell you what your strengths and weaknesses are. So as you can see from the screenshot here, maybe algebra is not your strong suit. Whoever did this diagnostic test, it looks like they're excellent in that, but it may tell you that you're not that great, and you would want to spend a little bit more time focusing on the algebra as opposed to arithmetic, for example. So that's what that looks like. It'll go over the questions, how many you got right, average time you spent on it, all that good stuff. So the GMAT Prep software, as I mentioned, you can find it on MBA.com. Download it for free. There's free practice tests there. What I normally recommend people do is if you're just getting started in preparing for the GMAT is that you take one right off the bat. Take one of those practice tests right off the bat. Simulate the testing environment as much as you can. See what you're going to score, and then start doing your research on schools and programs and that kind of stuff to see where you might fit in. See how much studying you might actually have to do. If you're a certain number off from the average score that a program accepted last year, you may want to look at really buckling down. Maybe you need more time than you thought, all that kind of stuff. So this is a screenshot from GMAT Prep. Basically, you can set your own question types now. If you download GMAT Prep in the past, I don't know that you could do a customized question set like this. So you can see there, you can answer all the questions if you want. You can study. You can do a practice exam. You can do them in order. You can do it randomly. If you want more critical reasoning than reading comprehension, if you want more data sufficiency than problem solving, you can do that as well. You can set the difficulty levels. So it's actually a really good tool for getting ready for the exam. So this is a screenshot from GMAT Prep. What's good about the new version, so this came out earlier this year, so you might not have this version if you downloaded it, let's say, last year. On the left, you can kind of see how much time you've spent on the question. When you've exceeded the ideal time for a question, the color changes to red, so as it is there. And on the right, you can see how long you spent on the set of questions. Again, once you go over what the ideal time would be, that green turns to red. This is really helpful. I talk to a lot of students, and it seems as though the biggest issue a lot of them have is the pacing of the exam. They've studied for months. They know all the math. They know all the grammar. They know all that stuff. But when they actually sit and take the exam, they run out of time. I don't want that to happen to you all. Use the GMAT Prep. Make sure you pace yourself correctly. There isn't a lot of time. It's 75 minutes, but you only end up having about 2 minutes per question. So this is a good way to kind of practice that. Again, when you're preparing, mimic the testing environment as much as you can. Try to eliminate distractions. Don't cheat and look up answers in the book or something like that. Have a timer there. It's only going to help you in the long run. So just one more screenshot from GMAT Prep here. This is when I took it this morning. I got an 800, so I wanted to give you a screenshot of that. No, I'm just kidding. Only a handful of people every year get an actual 800 on the exam. So don't be discouraged if you're not getting that 800 score in your practice. So another screenshot there. It'll tell you that you finished exam 1. Like I said, do that at the beginning. See where you may score. Formulate a plan from there. You may want, if there's a big gap and you don't think you're going to get it done by just sitting and cracking open a book every night, there are classes out there, there are study groups, all that kind of stuff. So it's a good way to kind of level set. And really, when you're preparing, kind of determine your own strengths and weaknesses. A lot of people don't like to focus on the parts that they struggle in. They like to get questions right when they're practicing and continue to do those types of questions. Really kind of focus on where you're not so great. I know it's tough to do, but hopefully you could see with the GMAT prep software and the way you can kind of customize the questions, you can definitely focus on the parts that you're weaker in. So the second most popular question I get, besides how do I prepare for the GMAT, the next one is how long should I study? The point of this slide is not to say if you study 96 hours, you're going to get a 700 or higher. The point of this slide is to say that you need to prepare. I'm always surprised by the number of students that come up to me and say, yeah, I took the GMAT without really preparing, and I wasn't happy with my score, so now I'm taking it again. Honestly, the amount of materials and prep stuff and things like that out there, I hate hearing that because there's tons of materials out there for you to prepare, and I don't want you to waste $250 taking the exam if you're not ready. There are ways to take practice exams, as I just showed you, without spending money. You know, there is going to be a considerable amount of time preparing, but you know what? Put the work in, get that good score, and you don't have to worry about taking it again. So these two graphics, this is on average how much people study. As I mentioned, a lot of factors go into how much time you want to study for. So take that practice exam and start gathering information about some target programs that you're looking at applying to. Identify the schools you want to apply to and check their application deadlines. That's going to help you determine how long you need to study for, how long you can study for. Register for the exam. Develop a study plan, like I mentioned. So the GMAT exam is done on an appointment basis, but you want to make sure you get that appointment time that you're looking for. I actually had a friend call me this morning saying he needs to take the GMAT next week, and all the appointments are booked. Is there anything I can do? No, there's nothing I can do. Those appointments get booked. So you want to give yourself plenty of time and register. Again, you're going to have to become familiar with the test structure and format and different question types. You're going to want to get a baseline of where you stand at the beginning. Like I said, those two practice exams are going to identify the skills that you need to study and remember. Don't go over the allotted time. Don't pause it. Really get an idea of what your score is going to be. Make sure you assess your progress along the way. You know, are you learning this stuff, or are you just picking up a book every night, answering a few questions, and not really retaining that information? It's one thing to just study and do problems for a couple of months, but you really want to make sure you're getting that information. You want to understand why you're getting problems wrong. You want to understand why you're getting questions right. And that's really going to help you in the long run in getting ready for the exam. So this is a screenshot of MBA.com, which I mentioned is our website. Here is where you would register to take the exam. Here's where you find the testing center closest to you. Find out everything you need to know about the GMAT. And if you don't find it there, there are ways to ask questions and stuff of us, which I will show you in a second. If you have some sort of disability that might require you, let's say, to get extra time on the exam, you can find out information about how to handle that on MBA.com. You can research programs. You know, let's say you want to go to Harvard Business School. You can search that on MBA.com. You can find out information about them, what their average score they accepted was, what kind of GPA they're looking for, all that good stuff. So really a great resource in terms of information, and also where you would actually register to take the exam. Also, this is where you would download the GMAT prep software that I was talking about. Like I said, if for whatever reason you don't get your question answered today, or you can't find it on MBA.com, Facebook and Twitter are also out there to help you try to answer questions, as well as the YouTube channel, which features some pretty useful videos. So here are, we've come to sort of the end here, so I will be happy to answer any questions that come in, and I'm seeing some pop up on my screen here now. So keep typing them in if you do have questions and things like that. I know we only have a few minutes left, but I will try to answer as many as I can, as long as you guys want to hang on the line. So
Great. Well, thank you so much, Trevor, for that insider look into IR Quant as well as the test in general. As Trevor mentioned, we have just a few minutes left in today's webinar to answer your questions. I think we can take maybe 2 questions, but there is some good news. There is a part 2 to this webinar series happening next Wednesday, September 18th at 10 o'clock a.m. Pacific. So if you want to sign up for that session, it's the part 2 of this webinar series. You can go to beatthegmat.com, and right on the homepage there's an events area where you'll see a link there, or you can search for that event, and we encourage you to sign up. So why don't we take a look at some of the questions coming in here. A question that we're seeing, Trevor, is typically how many questions are experimental in the IR and quant sections?
Yeah, so I saw that question come through, and that's actually a pretty good question. So for those of you that don't know, on the GMAT, oftentimes we'll put in experimental questions. And the reason that we do that is because let's say we come up with a question here, and we think it's a really good question, and we think it's difficult. We think it's something that a 90th percentile type test taker would get right. And you know, the lower 90% would not get right. We want to make sure that that's actually the case. It's one thing for us to say that, you know, that's how it works, but whether that actually works in reality, who knows? So we put them in the GMAT exam because we feel like that's the best way we can test that. So test takers don't know that they're experimental questions, but we get honest answers, right? In terms of how many there are in each exam, that's kind of a secret that the research department keeps here. That's for them to know and for everyone to just kind of speculate on. I don't know that information personally. And again, that's just to keep it so that people aren't preparing for experimental questions. We want to get the most honest answer possible. So if someone were to suspect that it's an experimental question or know that, you know, there's X number of experimental questions in a section, we might not get the best feedback for that question. So the best thing you can do is just kind of answer the questions that are in front of you, not worry about if they're experimental or not. And I promise you, you'll find out your score at the end.
All right, and Trevor, I think we have time for just one more question here, and it relates to percentiles in IR. So there have been some discussions in the Beat the GMAT community, some speculation that the percentiles will be volatile for some period of time, since this is a newer part of the test. At this point, do you feel like the percentiles for the IR section have stabilized?
Yeah, so normally we update the percentiles, I think it's every 6 months or so, maybe a year. But with the IR section, we are updating them much more frequently. In terms of how the schools are using those percentiles at this point and what they actually mean, I think we're still collecting data on that. I personally don't have a ton of feedback from schools at this point as to how they're using the IR. But what I will say is that this is a section that was created in response to direct feedback that we had from them. So these are skills that they're looking for their students to have. These question types are created with the schools in mind, based on, you know, things that they're asking the test to do. So you know, it's going to depend on the school as to how closely they're taking a look at the IR scores. You know, traditionally, you know, a lot of people will tell you that the total score is, you know, the first thing that they look at, and you know, I don't know to what extent that's true, but you know, hopefully in the next you know, year or 2, 3 years down the road, the IR is just right there. The percentile tables will be kind of stabilized as we get more and more data.
All right, and with that, Trevor, I think we are at the end of our hour. Trevor, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, no problem. And you know, I realize we didn't get to all of the questions, but like I said, Facebook and Twitter are great places to ask questions. We have a lot of reps from schools on a lot, and as well as folks that work here to kind of answer questions. So.
Yep, I second that as well. Facebook.com/officialgmat, very, very active community there. We also have a dedicated forum for GMAC within the Beat the GMAT community. If you go to our forums, there's an Ask the Test Maker area where you can also post some of your questions there. And if you enjoyed today's webinar, I highly encourage you to sign up for the part 2 of this series happening next Wednesday at September 18th at 10 o'clock a.m. Pacific. So for those of you who joined us late, we have been speaking with Trevor Reese. He is the field marketing coordinator for GMAC, and we're lucky enough to have him joining us again next week for that session. So thanks very much, everyone, for taking time out of your day to join us, and look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. All the best.